Hello, everyone, and welcome to this B2B marketing webinar in association with Funnel Fuel. My name is Kavita Singh. I'm head of growth solutions content at B2B Marketing. And today we are going to be discussing all things measurement when it comes to the digital advertising space in today's current marketing climate. In addition, we have released a report, B2B Digital Advertising, How to Thrive in a Privacy First World, which we definitely recommend you check out. But without further ado, let's welcome in our guest speaker for today, Mike Hardy, the co-founder and chief product officer over at Funnel Fuel. How are you doing today, Mike?
Hi, Kavita. Very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing great. Yeah, really excited to have you back on this webinar because you were on our previous session, which is great. So really looking forward to getting your perspective on sort of everything around measurement. I know that we focused on targeting and execution in the first two webinars. So I guess as an initial first question, can you tell me why measurement is sort of that crucial third piece in today's marketing landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think I was kind of borderline outspoken on this on our previous webinar, actually, Kavita, in terms of I've always argued that measurement is the kind of the layer on day zero where you begin. So as I see it, we've spoken previously about targeting and execution and now measurement. So targeting is the who, execution is the where or the how, and therefore measurement becomes the so what. Like ultimately the outcome that we're buying when we're investing in marketing or the objectives that we're trying to get to. And I think when we think about it in that lens, it does become critical because targeting and execution are therefore the inputs and measurement by de facto becomes the outcome or the output of the system. So it's the kind of the undervalued third leg of the tripod, I suppose, but like absolutely critical. Um, and I think it's a very interesting time to be talking about it, alongside a whole host of other challenges in the digital landscape at the moment. We're at a fascinating juncture for all three of our components, really, because they're all bedfellows and they all work together. But measurement, a bit like our targeting and our execution, is also under a lot of pressure from some of those macro forces that we're all aware of. The cookie, which has all but died, the changes that have been happening, led really by privacy frameworks like GDPR and the globalization of those frameworks, have seen kind of very large drop-offs in the measurement layer with clients that we're working with, which is kind of clearly challenging. Um, You've got the impact of LLMs, which are replacing search engine or the kind of so-called zero-click search. That's leading to kind of less measurable traffic, often coming through vendor and publisher websites at the moment. So that kind of measurability there has kind of shrunk. And then all of this is set against the backdrop of we work in the wonderful world of B2B, where we've got long sales cycles, we've got buying committees as opposed to individuals, committees spread remotely in different continents, in different time zones, kind of smaller data sets linked to data assets like target account lists. So it adds all kind of layers of kind of challenge and intrigue, I think, around measurement that makes it a very interesting topic. And I suppose, yeah, just as kind of something of a parting thought, the way that I think about it, or not a parting thought, a kind of segue thought, hopefully, but I think about measurement in the signals vernacular that's kind of taking over around kind of the advertising technology sector at the moment. And all kinds of data points just become signals. It's like intent can be a signal measured kind of on site or kind of third party, second party intent signals, post click behavior signals. So it's kind of a reframing, really, and thinking about high value actions that I'm sure we'll talk more about as a set of behavioral signals. And I think of all of these as sensors, really. So you kind of a sensor will give you a reading, which should be therefore a score, and then we want to be scoring all these different levels of measurement to make a more scientific, scalable system to drive the more modern marketing stack.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you named quite a few very complicated issues in the B2B marketing landscape already. But actually, it's quite nice to have a framework where you kind of describe targeting, execution, and measurement, but then you also have that question kind of on the side of it as well. So, yeah, I think it's really great to kind of have that structure. Um, I guess my next question would be, how should organizations think about measuring success? And I know you touched a little bit upon third-party data, but obviously third-party data has historically been dependent on targeting. So I think it'd be interesting to kind of get a little bit of clarity around that.
Yeah, and I don't think, we've seen a complete decline and loss on third party data. Those data sets are kind of out there. And they continue to be out there and they've survived a lot of that kind of drop off that's happened in the kind of cookie apocalypse. But it doesn't get away from the fact that that fuel is probably running a little bit thinner. Um, and I think really success is increasingly measured by how well you use your own signals, that kind of first party data signal there.
Mhm.
And those own signals are really where the gold dust sits in any marketing stack because first party data signal is always going to be your strongest layers or the branches closest to the tree trunk. They can carry the most weight and should be scored accordingly. And third party data's got a role to play, but it should be more supplementary and scored a bit lighter, I think. So my view is that we should be measuring the signals that we're able to capture really more so than the segments. Um, and using those first party data assets that we're able to capture as really kind of breadcrumbs of intent linked at the account and persona level. Because our view really, if we're not able to measure back to that account layer, then we're not really getting that measurability at the signal level that we need as a modern marketer or marketing stack. And if we can't measure to accounts, we can't then measure to revenue and pipeline and the real outcomes that we're trying to drive when we're running marketing in its entirety. So those kind of first party and persona level, account level signals we want to be mapping to, we want to be thinking, or I think about these as a series of high value actions or high value engagements that we can track on our own website or website assets, first party assets. So these could be a whole multitude of things. I've got literally kind of over 100 of them that I attempt to kind of capture when we're running programs of analytics. There's stuff like dwelling on pricing pages, product comparisons, docs, buying committee members going to API and integration documentation or compliance documentation. These are all kind of breadcrumbs of intent where singly, when these signals fire, they're not necessarily like singly powerful, but when these signals play together in concert, together they're loud and they paint a clearer picture and an understanding of kind of intent and measurement. And that's all reliant on this ability to decompose the third party data segment level into individual account and persona verticals, and then measure those back against these high value actions or engagements. And then we can introduce scoring over the top using kind of everything from attention metrics on the ads through to all these high value actions mapping through to pipeline with CRM. That becomes a measure, a measurement stack for the future, which is kind of considerably ahead of just trying to measure, say, for example, click-through rate back to a whole bunch of third-party data segments. So I guess it's a shift from those audience segments to accounts and personas, mapping to kind of attention on key pages, repeat visits, form starts, all those key high value actions, and taking that view fundamentally that if you can't map to the account, then you can't steer it towards revenue, which presumably is the ultimate goal that we're trying to kind of get to when we think about measurement and business outcomes.
Yeah, yeah, that's really well said. I 100% agree with you. I think you might have answered a little bit of this already because you kind of talked about some metrics. But how do you define success beyond sort of the vanity metrics that marketing organizations might be tied to?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd always open by saying I entirely understand how we are at a stage where a lot of these so-called vanity metrics, typically stuff like click-through rate,
Hmm.
becomes the kind of data point that we anchor to because of B2B and because of the challenges on measurement, and it's getting harder. The fact that B2B websites typically, but not always, don't have an e-commerce style kind of true conversion event. So that actual sale or buy is typically captured more at the CRM level in an offline transaction. And therefore, I think kind of clicks have been treated as like a bellwether for intent or at least interest. Um, but ultimately, success isn't clicks. Success is really account progression. It's nurturing towards pipeline. And those vanity metrics are only really talking about kind of surface level activity, whereas the value metrics I like to try and think about are more aligned to impact.
Mm.
Uh, to kind of clicks are cheap, pipelines priceless, easy throwaway comment, easier said than done to kind of measure, right? But ultimately, in all the data that we've tracked, and we've tracked an awful lot of it across impressions, clicks, and web interactions on scores of B2B vendor websites and hundreds of millions of on-site engagements that we get with our web analytics. And one thing I'll say with a high degree of certainty is that clicks don't equate to quality. And actually, it's a disproportional relationship between a higher click-through rate and the behaviors that we want to be seeing happening post-click, which would be higher levels of engagement on the website, um, high value actions, all the stuff that we've kind of touched on. So therefore, we need to have something that kind of captures this sentiment better. And I've gotten very interested in using systems that bookmark attention metrics, which is really like viewability 2.0, right? Where the industry was trying to go with viewability was kind of a brilliant start, but it's a 10-year out of date or 10-year old, a decade old kind of piece of technology viewability. And attention metrics is really like 2025, that's called it from today, kind of upgrade, which is a composite score, bringing a lot more dynamic data points like attention seconds, but also ad clutter, placement on the page, and right rail versus in article, size of placement, all kinds of different factors that measure quality. Um, and I'm really increasingly focused as I start to think about measurement as well as targeting and execution in the omni-channel world that we now live in with all of these newer, quite glamorous, sexier formats that have come into the addressable marketing world, like connected television, audio, digital out of home and the likes, but a load of those formats don't even have clicks. You're not going to get clicks on a digital out of home ad or clicks on a webinar recording or live webinar. You're not going to get clicks coming out of TV and a load of these new channels. So we need a normalizer metric that will sit up front on the kind of ad side and kind of map back to that pipeline and that business growth. And I think all the data is indicatively leading us in the direction of attention metrics, at least for, as the best of those upfront media metrics that we've got available to us today. Won't Not to say there won't be innovation that will kind of keep improving that. But I think the standardization of that is super interesting from a measurement point of view. Um, so that really is kind of capturing all of the kind of newfangled types of kind of ad executions and giving a level of normalization, which I think is really valuable. So then you get cross-channel parity and you get a single scoreboard that's kind of helping us mark the homework and performance of those kind of across every format, which is really interesting. And then from there, where there are clicks or where there are web visits that happen that can be attributed back to any of those formats, then we work on scoring those. And then you end up with a capability then to build a really custom brand centric, custom scoring framework that can be tweaked, that can really take into account what the brand knows about their web experiences, and kind of how those map historically and opportunities with predictive analytics and ML and all kinds of stuff that maybe we'll talk about afterwards. But that just opens up so many more opportunities to really get to the point that we can try and evidence having accounts in motion as opposed to trying to evidence kind of another dashboard showing a whole bunch of kind of impressions and click-through rates, which incidentally will always be massively skewed when you're trying to run target account list activity. I might get 5 impressions on a small target account and 1 click, and suddenly I've got a 20% click-through rate. Is that really giving me a metric that's going to map back to accounts in motion and pipeline? I don't really think so. So I think define success by progression through the funnel and that account level impact, score attention, track the high value actions, and then you're getting closer to proving pipeline and revenue impact.
Yeah, I think what you said around, attributing measurement around impact and quality are so important because that means it's backed by probably a sound strategy as well versus kind of just looking at figures for the sake of looking at figures, post campaign. I guess that kind of leads me into my next question. How early in the campaign planning process should measurement frameworks be established and developed?
Yeah, so I think I've presented fairly strong views on this in the past, and I've not changed my mind really on them, Kavita. Really, it links to the last webinar that we did together. I think it really boils down to day zero, and it's really day zero where it didn't happen, because otherwise you're just talking about forensics if you're looking at measurement at the end of a campaign versus flight control or whatever analogy you'd want if you kind of got it up front and got it in place. So if you've got measurement on day zero, or you kind of commence measurement on day zero pre-campaign flight, then really at that point we've designed a scoreboard before we started playing the game, which I think is fairly standard in all other areas.
Mm,
Um, and we've defined our business outcomes that we're chasing. We've maybe got a smaller series of kind of really important high value website actions we might want to track, and map back to account and persona. We might have a tailwind of kind of longer sales cycle, deeper research, indicative behaviors that we might also be using from an HVA point of view. But we're going to have a small handful of core ones because that works to kind of optimization and kind of machine optimization and algorithms for trading of the media. So we need to be clear in our measurement there, from again before we go live so that we can define that kind of scoreboard and make sure we're optimizing to what matters. And then if we're doing that, we can write the instrumentation plan, all of the kind of events and the IDs and the naming conventions, the quality assurance before the creative and the budgets lock in place. So
mm,
we plan the signals and then we plan the spend and we execute the spend, and we've got a better chance, I think, at that stage of succeeding against a considered set of business outcomes, or at least precursor micro conversions, which are going to drive that account progression that we've talked about. And they're really going to be a set of baseline assumptions and hypotheses, which we're going to be looking at to kind of demonstrate the lift and the performance that we've got with guardrails like cohorts and incrementality, and wire those signals right back into activation from the moment it's going live. So then you've got
mm.
optimization kicking in from basically day one, because it might be sitting against a stack of measurement that's been running for days or weeks or months kind of prior to go live. So I think if we do it this way, you know, we're designing it in rather than bolting it on.
Yeah.
Kind of to that point about it not being forensics at the end, it's kind of more flight control as we kind of go through the journey of executing the campaign.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I think at that point feels a little bit more like an afterthought after all this planning and strategy that's going in place. So it kind of seems like a wasted effort. I think to kind of go off that point, and I know that we've teased this in our webinar synopsis as well, so I do want to touch on it. Is
Mm.
there a way that you can leverage predictive analytics to sort of estimate and predict trends and performance before the actual campaign launch?
I think there are, but with guardrails. Uh,
Mm,
so, and I think as kind of caveats around all of this, my personal belief, and it definitely might not be sacred or even correct, but my personal belief is that the nuances of B2B make predictive analytics much harder to implement than maybe what we would see in B2C, where we can deal with genuinely statistically relevant sample sizes and big data
mm,
pools. Um, and all of this kind of caveat, especially in a world that's changing as fast as what we're seeing at the moment with the impact of LLM and zero click search and all the changes that are happening, because anything that we're trying to predict, we're predicting on historical data. And because it's B2B where we've got quite narrow or small segment sizes, that invariably means that we start tracking further backwards in time to try and get to that statistical relevancy point. And the further backwards we go in time, then we're going into a world that's maybe changed, because it is changing so rapidly. And I think we've talked previously about the impact of LLM going from 1.5% of search market share to 10% by June just on ChatGPT alone. So like, and that
Mhm.
is massively happening. And 89% of B2B buying journeys are now impacted by LLM. And actually, the most satisfied, kind of end users of LLM in B2B are actually on the bigger ticket size. So those kind of more important decisions where maybe I would have been less likely to think it was being heavily used because they're such critical decisions. So I think, yes, there are opportunities here, but there are also caveats.
Mhm.
Um, so I think prediction should always be seen really as a compass, not a contract. It's not going to be a fortune teller showing us the exact future, but it could be indicative. Uh,
Mhm.
so yes, I think yeah, when it comes to the small data sets, we need to go a bit deeper, not wider, to try and kind of get these right lenses and try and get a directional head start rather than a verdict from it. And I think we need to be really thinking about these first party signals. We talked about the first party data being the gold a little bit earlier on and those high value actions. And where that gets interesting from a predictive point of view is they start to decompose a conversion event, which in B2B takes, as we know, months and months. I think the latest stats I saw were still kind of 9 months. There hasn't been a massive flattening of the buying cycle yet. And you've still got so many committee members, which seems to be bloating bigger and bigger, having more and more touch points, which I think are 80 to 100 touch points now before contract. So decomposing all of that, which is a lot of noise and a lot of time, into these kind of high value engagements and these scoring models starts to give us an opportunity for prediction and machine learning and dare I even say it, AI to take the data sets that are coming from CRM, if we assume that CRM's got the kind of ultimate source of truth for the conversion event, and start mapping that back. And then you have got an element of predictive analytics to start looking at, hopefully with enough data scale to be looking at different geographical disparities and different company size and firmographic data breakouts and all the stuff you'd want to be doing to try and model more accurately. You do then, I think, have an opportunity to maybe start to find some first party needles um, in the haystack, which will beat any haystack stacked with third party data because they're so
Mhm.
relevant to the brand directly. Um, and then you just need to start having kind of pretty regular update cadence, I think, on all of this stuff as real measurement begins to land. So it's more of a weather forecasting model, really. Never
Yeah.
perfect. When we know that sat in this country, don't we? But it's aiming. If it's aiming at the right storm, it's giving us a prediction guideline, and then measurement will kind of just fortify that over time. And so I think there is a role there, but I think we just have to be mindful that we're playing in a difficult world with B2B and different buying committees and different accounts are going to take their own path to purchase, and it's just going to be difficult. Whereas in B2C, we could just mine, millions of rows of data and
Mhm.
potentially kind of be able to kind of pull a bit more statistical relevancy out a little bit sooner. But there's a lot of value in kind of trying to build those models, and I dare say it. Some of the elite vendors out there that are getting on top of those are probably finding that they're starting to win.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely think it sounds like there is opportunity, but you have to consider the industry that you are working in, specifically when it comes to predictive analytics. You always hear that like B2B should be more like B2C, but as you just said, there's a really good example of the sort of disparity and sort of nuance that lies there. So yeah, I think that's a really great point. Another thing that we teased out was around CDPs. They sort of promised to bring first party data together in one place, but I'd love to know from your perspective, how realistic is that and what role should CDPs play in building sort of your sort of overarching measurement strategy?
Yeah, I think they are a foundational layer in a first party data stack. As we've kind of talked around, that first party data there is definitely an area of investment for the right reasons that brands are making. CDPs are powerful bits of kit, but they're not magic.
Mhm.
Um, and like a lot of tech, that B2B marketers are engaging with out of the ad tech ecosystem, they often have more of a kind of B2C leaning. They're built for kind of a different use case, or the nuances of use case. However, they centralize signals. and therefore give you a pipeline around first party data signals, which is inherently incredibly valuable. But still need the strategy to interpret those signals, action those signals, and make them valuable. And all this first party data investment can create a cost line that kind of starts to run quite hot quite fast. So there's a lot of value there, but it needs to be used right. Um, I think of the CDP as the warehouse, really. I suppose in slightly simple terms. But measurements, what tells you what's worth shipping out of that warehouse, I suppose, right? So if
Mm,
you've got the strategy right, and kind of dialed in, then this is a piece of technology that can absolutely sit, at the forefront of kind of a first party data strategy and a marketing stack and paid media activation and driving kind of pipeline. Um, but they are part of a system, I think, as opposed to a complete standalone. And the best, GTM organizations now are really systemizing these stacks and kind of joining them together and strategizing them and getting all of that right. So I don't think there a single investment that anybody listening today would kind of go and find would be a magic bullet.
mm.
Go away and kind of invest in a CDP and off you go, like the world's ills are solved. But it can absolutely be part of what we've been talking about today so far, which is like signals-based marketing, inclusive of measurement, inclusive of targeting and execution layers. Um, but I do expect that most people listening will probably already be investing in that there.
Mm. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think it's pretty, as you said, we've been talking a lot around that. I guess once you have the data, how do you translate it into sort of actionable next steps? Because I guess it'd be great to know what's sort of important to analyze. Bearing in mind, it obviously depends on, the campaign, the organization, what, they would consider to be success.
Yeah, I think it's trying to get to the point where the metrics that we're playing with and measuring, our measurement bellwethers are anchored against insights and insights that should be giving action, and insights that can't kind of provide actionable next steps are just trivia, really. Um, which kind of comes back to that whole kind of piece around kind of clicks. Is that the right kind of bellwether for intent? Probably not. Can we be using kind of attention metrics, high value actions, scoring attention, scoring intent from a first party point of view? And then kind of, I think that kind of scoring for me is a really big part of actionable next steps. Because as soon as you've got onto the stage where you've got scoring wrapped around measurement layers, then you can systemize how you use that next. So we run a lot of activity, which is an account-based marketing approach to brand, I suppose, really, where the upper funnel is kind of very large segments that represent a total addressable market, maybe less customers, for example. And then we would use measurement layers that take scoring to kind of slice and dice across kind of firmographic attributes, company level attributes, and persona attributes across that great big segment, including kind of website behaviors, including maybe attention metrics and ad metrics data. Then that feeds when a certain score is hit, a more kind of personalized experience that we go on to. Then you're thinking about, well, how can you start to personalize at one level deeper? Well, if that top level of an account-based approach to advertising has got a generic set of creative that's talking to all industries, all kind of niches or verticals or people or stakeholders or committee members, then that's kind of generic and you're casting a big wide net, and then you're letting measurement take you on a journey that will really act as the sat nav for where you go next and where different accounts are taken. So we would then be using those sort of kind of scores that come out of engagement scoring, intent scoring, and a load of proprietary scoring that we run against the high value actions and attention, all those different layers of the onion, in order to then open up secondary and third and kind of different funneled levels of targeting and messaging that really takes you on a one to an awful lot to a one to many to one to few to maybe one to one account based. Um, and that's really starting to translate the numbers that come out of the scoring into a set of creative narratives using tooling like DCO to have more personalized conversations, or just sets of kind of more tailored creative that are going to talk to accounts by cut by vertical industry, et cetera, those different kind of common firmographic attributes, which is all storytelling really, which is kind of where what marketing's kind of at its very core is trying to do. It's a data-led approach to storytelling, and it's letting data kind of direct where the story goes next and the narrative of that. And it's always trying to tie the data back to the kind of so what and the what next.
Right.
That's kind of, I think that kind of scoring methodology is I feel what allows us to kind of go and do that. So then we've taken, I suppose if we kind of walk that back slightly, we've gone from a world where you might have that ABA approach. It's got a one big segment, and you might just be looking at click-through rates and running into a world where brand tourism, competitor clicks, accidental clicks, other noisy data points are coming, getting in the way of the journey that we're trying to take accounts on through a nurture cycle to closing pipeline. Um, and we've tried to walk that into a more modern stack that's decomposing the third party data segments that we talked about earlier into individually targetable named accounts and persona segments. That then's giving us an agility in our data models to score a whole set of different, more modern metrics um, individually, scoring those individual metrics against each account, persona, and firmographic attribute also individually. The cumulative upside that comes out of that is such an agile, modern scoring method where you've got individual accounts and personas have got a whole set of scores linked to engagement and intent, and depth of engagement and attention that they've been paying on these different levels of advertising message across the big ABA into the kind of more one to many, one to few, one to one account levels. Then all of that is our what next and the so what, and it's kind of letting the data take us on that journey. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think you broke it down in a really comprehensible way, which I think, I mean, I imagine people are going to want to sort of replay that answer a couple of times just because, yeah, it's really good stuff. I can see we have a little less than 5 minutes left. So I will leave you with one last question. How do you see measurement evolving with the rise of AI and privacy regulations? Just because I know we've sort of touched a little bit on AI, throughout this webinar already.
Yeah, we have, and there's obviously no doubt at all that it's having a massive impact on our industry, as it is on most industries out there too. So yes, I think kind of measurement in general around kind of privacy and AI, I think there is a journey of travel which is quite globally clear now, that began with GDPR and has kind of rolled out internationally, and the US is kind of very much going this way, other markets are following. So I think it's kind of going to boil down into kind of less surveillance and kind of more science.
Mm.
And we are starting to think about, well, how can we, in the spirit of that, I suppose, and in the spirit of the laws and what they're trying to get to, is we're trying to measure much more against accounts and kind of clusters of personas and individuals. Because when you think about measurement, somebody on an iPhone from London or in the middle of London going on your vendor website doesn't really tell you very much. We're trying to anchor back to those higher data models, which are inherently got more privacy by design baked into them because they're kind of corporate, kind of legitimate interest kind of corporations are out there. So I think privacy pushes us from like user level, very detailed, overly nuanced analytics tracking, where we've seen it over the last 15, 20 years, to more kind of concentrated, aggregated, cohorted first party data signals. Um, and then where AI starts to come in is filling in the gaps with the modeled kind of insights, propensity, casual lift, fast MMM models, kind of however we kind of want to be deploying that. So that's allowing us then to kind of think about that progression at the account level that we talked about, using attention metrics on the ads that normalizes across all of our nice kind of array and growing array of addressable advertising kind of channels, whether it's television or banner display or social or anywhere in between. And then we're using high value actions to kind of measure what happens on the website. And then we're using methodologies like clean rooms, methodologies like server side tagging, on-device computation to keep evidence flowing without leaking that kind of PII level of identity. Because I don't think in B2B we ever genuinely needed that level anyway. I think it's a misleading data point, which is super interesting because it gives B2B an opportunity to iterate and to build. Um, outside of those kind of individual PII levels and kind of with those different data mappings, I believe, and I've not gotten there yet, but my hope and belief is that there is a powerful analytics and measurement stack to be built in B2B that leans on B2B only in that one swimming lane that takes advantage of that kind of specific channel and vertical that we work in to enable kind of a lot more measurement that can feed AI with a lot more capability to track those account level progressions. And then I think if that all follows through, then we probably end up with AI forming some form of like co-pilot for truth, kind of finding the data, automatically QAing the data, detecting drift, anomaly flags, confidence bands rather than single numbers, trying to really kind of make that data actionable and insight driven so it isn't trivia, so it's actually kind of meaningful for kind of what we're trying to do, the so what we do next, which invariably is often like the next stage of the marketing mix. Um, so I think that motion shifts really from tracking to testing, um, synthetic controls, more holdouts, always on incrementality. And we, as an industry, we need to harden that trust layer, don't we, really? Trust is so inherently key for purchase progression. So I think if we do all of this right, we kind of can do. And we take ourselves away from, this kind of PII. Do we straddle the edges of it? Where does B2B sit in that PII world? Hopefully, we can walk a step back or up on the data model with clear taxonomies, clear consent governance, and explainability about all of this. Because we want our models to be auditable, not magical. They shouldn't kind of be spitting out make believe. They should have a trackable data journey that they've gone on, which is highly defensible to the highest standards of any privacy law. Um, so, yeah, I think kind of intent over identity, experiments over anecdotes.
Fantastic. Well, I think that is about all the time we have for today. Thanks so much, Mike, for sharing all your insights and examples today. I thought they were all absolutely excellent. This actually concludes a series of webinars we have done with Funnel Fuel, with the first two being around targeting and execution. We encourage you to check them out, as well as the Funnel Fuel report that we teased earlier. Finally, if you'd like to listen back to any of today's session, this webinar will be available on demand so you can watch it all again at a time that suits you. Thank you very much, and I will see everyone again soon for another webinar. Thanks so much, Mike.
Thanks, Kavita.